Chapter 14. A brief history of the invasive fish species in the Mississippi River and their impact on international commerce. After Amy pitched the metal vial into the river, it in fact did not float all the way to the Gulf of Mexico as she had hoped. That would have required a series of remarkable coincidences considering how many opportunities there are for a floating object to wash ashore or become ensnared in some obstacle along these hundreds of miles of heavily traveled waterway. The object did, however, make it to the Mississippi, where it was promptly swallowed by an 80-pound Asian carp. The carp boasted a proud, heroic lineage, though of course it was not aware of this, or anything else aside from a vague sense that being a fish was pretty sweet. You see, it is well known that the best way to catch catfish in the Mississippi is with cruelty. You simply take a smaller living fish, ram a hook through its back, and secure the line to a float or an anchor. The terrified, impaled bait will desperately try to swim away until its frantic struggle attracts a catfish that will swallow it whole. In the 1970s, fishermen started using Asian carp for their live bait operations, but the carp quickly turned the tables. They ripped themselves free from their rigs, found mates, started families, and, having no natural predators, promptly spread down the Mississippi like a conquering horde. It was only a few years ago that someone had the bright idea to catch and export Asian carp back to China, where they can still fetch a higher price as a delicacy. Thus, the carp that swallowed the vial was caught the next day by a commercial fishing vessel owned by a man named John Minchin. The fish, with the vial lodged in its throat, was taken back to port and then crammed alive into a freshwater container, along with 100 other carp just like it. The container was then transferred by forklift into the belly of an airliner. As the carp swam in its cramped, dark prison, it had no idea it was being flown around the world and, in fact, did not even know it lived in a world that could be flown around. It should be noted that 4 minutes after offloading the fish, a crew member on Minchin's boat tossed a cigarette that ignited fumes from a leaking fuel line. The ensuing explosion killed 2 men. The carp containing the metal vial arrived at a massive fish processing facility in Nanton, 7,370 miles away from where it had been caught. There, a machine designed to lop off the head of the carp smashed into the metal object in its gullet, causing the blade to shatter. This sent a shard flying into the neck of an unfortunate line worker, who bled out in 43 seconds flat. An hour later, the line repair tech, a 23-year-old man named Min, replaced the ruined blade on the fish decapitator and, during cleanup, found the strange metal vial wedged in the works. Recognizing it as some kind of foreign object and not a loose part of any of the machine's components, Min washed the metal cylinder and marveled at its properties. It felt cold, as if refrigerated from the inside, but was otherwise featureless. No seams where it could be opened, no inscriptions or decorations. It had mangled the teeth of the processor, yet had not a scratch on its surface. Min decided to take the object home. His young wife suffered from multiple sclerosis and was unable to work a day job. However, she had an artistic streak and had discovered that it was therapeutic for her to make sculptures out of found objects, welding the pieces together and selling the finished products on the internet, if that is, it was one of the few pieces she had not grown too attached to. Min thus tried to bring home any items he thought she would find interesting, though regardless of what he brought her, she would always smile and make the same little sound every time, as if gasping with delight. A week later, the metal vial had become the torso of a sculpture in the shape of a steampunk robot, its joints and limbs made up of springs and gears she had recovered from an old clock. The parts were held together with glue, as she had found the metal of the vial could not be welded or soldered. Still, she had finished the figurine and put it up on sale for the online craft marketplace Etsy. A week later, it sold to a teenager in Spain named Juan Jimenez. Unfortunately, he would never receive the item. The international FedEx flight carrying the parcel crashed into the French countryside, killing everyone on board. In the name of international cooperation and improving safety standards, the United States National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB for short, frequently sends teams to assist in the investigation of crash sites around the world. The lead investigator, named John Mendelsohn, discovered the vial when he accidentally kicked it, his attention drawn to this lone, unburnt object in a twisted pile of scorched metal that had been roasting in jet fuel for several hours. The vial was clean, the other parts of the sculpture having been blasted neatly off of its surface. It seemed impossible that the item could be a factor in the crash, but he kept finding his curiosity drawn to it, particularly the way in which it seemed to always remain about 30 degrees below room temperature. More out of blind curiosity than anything, Middleton decided to ship the object to a private aviation forensics laboratory in Wichita, Kansas for analysis. This time, the cargo landed safely in Newark, and soon after, the vial was on a courier truck heading west. The route to Wichita would not have taken it through undisclosed, as the interstate bypassed the town completely. However, the driver of the courier truck, Minnie Johnson, heard from dispatch that traffic was backed up on said interstate for miles due to a truck full of bees that had overturned, blocking both westbound lanes. Dispatch did not let her know that a young man in a passing vehicle had jumped out in order to rescue the driver of that semi, only to be attacked by bees and promptly die from anaphylaxis. Minnie was forced to exit onto Highway 131 toward the creepy small city she always tried to avoid whenever possible. 2 minutes after entering undisclosed city limits, the driver approached an overpass and saw some dumb fuck in a Range Rover trying to pass a semi in the eastbound lane, setting the SUV on a collision course with Minnie's own goddamned face. Minnie braked, but knew that ultimately would have no effect on how the situation would play out. She had nowhere to go, and at best could decrease the amount the Range Rover's cabin was compacted by 10% or so, to make it a little easier for the highway patrol to dig the body parts out of the wreckage. The life or death of the Range Rover driver was entirely in their own hands. She felt only a split second of relief when the Range Rover jerked aside and threaded the needle between Minnie's rig and the one in the other lane. That's because right behind the suicidal Range Rover was a psychopath with an even more fervent death wish. The driver of the flatback truck had his goddamned headlights off. Minnie uttered just one syllable of what was going to be an extraordinarily creative string of profanities before her rig slammed into the truck. Both vehicles went tumbling over the railing, the cab never detaching from the trailer, leaving it and the driver's shattered body dangling off the overpass just a few feet above the roadway that crossed below. Passing under the overpass at that exact moment was a pack of 6 motorcycles driven by members of the Christ's Rebellion gang led by Lemmy Roach, with John Beergut Klosterman bringing up the rear. Beergut happened to glance up exactly at the moment that the horrific collision took place overhead. A semi-trailer rolling and flying to pieces, sending cargo raining down on the roadway around the bikes. Beergut was so busy dodging debris that he did not feel that a single metal object had landed in the sweatshirt hood that was draped between his shoulder blades. The cylinder would remain there until he would tumble to the ground in the parking lot of the Roach Motel, being bitten by the flying heads of his own deceased grandmother.